Chapter 3. In the earliest cities. Saving an old building. Jaspal and Harpreet were playing cricket in the lane outside their home when they noticed the people who were admiring the dilapidated old building that the children called the haunted house. "Look at the architecture," said one of the men. "Have you seen the fine wood carving?" asked one of the women. "We must write to the minister so that she makes arrangements to repair and preserve this beautiful house." Why, they wondered, would anybody be interested in the old run-down house? The story of Harappa. Very often, old buildings have story to tell. Nearly 150 years ago, when railway lines were being laid down for the first time in Punjab, engineers stumbled upon the site of Harappa in the present-day Pakistan. To them, it seemed like a mound that was rich source of ready-made high-quality bricks. So they carried off thousands of bricks from the walls of the old building of the city to build railway lines. Many buildings were completely destroyed. Then, about 80 years ago, archaeologists found the site and realized that it was one of the most oldest cities in the subcontinent. As this was the first city to be discovered, all the sites from where similar buildings and other things were found were described as Harappan. These cities were developed about 4,700 years ago. Very often, old buildings are pulled down to make new way for new construction. Do you think it is important to preserve old buildings? What was special about these cities? Many of these cities were divided into two or more parts. Usually, the parts to the west were smaller but higher. Archaeologists describe this as the citadel. Generally, the part to the east was larger but lower. This is called the lower town. Very often, walls of the baked brick was built around each part. The bricks were so well baked that they have lasted for thousands of years. The bricks were laid in an interlocking pattern that made the walls strong. In some cities, special buildings were constructed on the citadel. For example, in Mohenjo-daro, a very special tank, which archaeologists call the Great Bath, was built in the area. This was lined with bricks coated with plaster and made watertight with a layer of natural tar. There were steps leading down to it from two sides. While there was rooms on all sides, water was probably brought in from a well and drained out after use. Perhaps important people took a dip in this tank on special occasions. Other cities such as Kalibangan and Lothal had fire altars where sacrifices may have been performed, and some cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa and Lothal had elaborate storehouses. Houses, drains and streets. Generally, houses were either 1 or 2 story high with rooms built around a courtyard. Most houses had a separate bathing area and some had well to supply water. Many of these cities had covered drains. Notice how carefully these were laid out in a straight lines. Although you cannot see it, each drain has a gentle slope so that water could flow through it. Very often, drains in the houses were connected to those on the streets and smaller drains led into bigger ones. As the drains were covered, inspection holes were provided at intervals to clean them. All three houses, drains and streets were probably planned and built at the same time. List at least 2 differences between the houses described here and those that you have studied in chapter 2. Life in the city. A Harappan city was a very busy place. There were people who planned the construction on special building in the city. These were probably the rulers. It is likely that the rulers sent people to distant lands to get metals, precious stones and other things that they wanted. They may have kept the valuable objects as the ornament of gold and silver or beautiful beads for themselves, and there were scribes, the people who knew how to write, who helped prepare the seals, and perhaps wrote on the other materials that have not survived. Besides, there were men and women craft persons making all kinds of things, either in their own homes or in special workshops. People were traveling to distant land or returning with raw materials and perhaps stories. Many terracotta toys have been found, and the children must have played with this. Make a list of people who lived in the city. Were any of these people listed as living in villages such as Mehergarh? New crafts in the city. Let us look at some of the objects that were made and found in Harappan cities. Most of the things that have been found by archaeologists are made of stone, shell, and metal, including copper, bronze, gold, and silver. Copper and bronze were used to make tools, weapons, ornaments, and vessels. Gold and silver were used to make ornaments and vessels. Perhaps the most striking finds are those of beads, weights, and blades. The Harappans also made seals out of stone. These are generally rectangular and usually have an animal carved on them. The Harappans also made pots with beautiful black design, such as one shown on page 6. Cotton was probably grown at Mehergarh from about 7,000 years ago. Actual pieces of cloth were found attached to the lid of the silver vase and some copper objects at Mohenjo-daro. Archaeologists have also found spindle holes made of terracotta and faience. These were used to spin thread. Faience. Unlike stone or shell that are found naturally, faience is a material that is artificially produced. A gum was used to shape sand and powdered quartz into an object. The object then glazed, resulting in a shiny glassy surface. The color of the glaze were usually blue or green. Faience was used to make beads, bangles, earrings, and tiny vessels. Many of the things that were produced probably the work of specialist. A specialist is a person who trained to do only one kind of work, for example cutting stone or polishing beads or carving seals. Look at the illustration of page 28 and see how well the face is carved and how carefully the beard is shown. This must have been the work of an expert craft person. Not everybody could have been a specialist. We do not know whether only men were specialists or only women were specialists. Perhaps some women and men may have been specialists. In search of raw materials. Raw materials are substances that are either found naturally, such as wood or ores of metal, or produced by farmers or herders. These are then processed to produce finished goods. For example, cotton, produced by farmers, is a raw material that may be processed to make cloth. While some of the raw materials that the Harappans used were available locally, many items such as copper, tin, gold, silver, and precious stones had to be brought from distant places. The Harappans probably got copper from present-day Rajasthan and even from Oman in West Asia. Tin, which was mixed with copper to produce bronze, may have been brought from present-day Afghanistan and Iran. Gold could have come all the way from present-day Karnataka, and precious stones from present-day Gujarat and Iran and Afghanistan. Food for people in the cities. While many people lived in the cities, others living in the countryside grew crops, reared animals. These farmers and herders supplied food to the craft persons, scribes, and rulers in the city. We know from the remains of plants that the Harappans grew wheat, barley, pulses, peas, rice, sesame, linseed, and mustard. A new tool, the plough, was used to dig the earth for tuning the soil and planting seeds, while real ploughs, which were probably made of wood, have not survived. Toy models have been found. As this region does not receive heavy rainfall, some form of irrigation may have been used. This means that the water was stored and supplied to the fields when the plants were growing. The Harappans reared cattle, sheep, goat, and buffalo. Waters and pastures were available around settlements. However, in the dry summer month, large herds of animals were probably taken to greater distances in search of grasses and water. They are also collected fruits like bear, caught fish, and hunted wild animals like antelope. A closer look: Harappan towns in Gujarat. The city of Dholavira was located on Khadir Bet, also spelled as wet, in the run of Kutch, where there was fresh water and fertile soil. Unlike some of the other Harappan cities, which were divided into parts, Dholavira was divided into 3 parts, and each part was surrounded with massive stone walls. The entrances through gateways. There was also a large open area in the settlement where public ceremonies could be held. Other fields include large letters of the Harappan scripts that were carved out of white stone and perhaps inlaid in woods. This is a unique find, as generally Harappan writing has been found on small objects such as seals. The city of Lothal stood beside a tributary of Sabarmati in Gujarat. Close to the Gulf of Khambat, it was situated near the area where raw materials such as semi-precious stones were easily available. This was an important center for making objects out of stone, shell, and metal. There was also a large storehouse in the city. Many seals and sealings, the impressions of the seals on the clay, were found in the storeroom. A building that was found here was probably a workshop for making beads. Pieces of stone, half-made beads, tools for making beads, and finished beads have all been found here. Seals and sealings. Seals may have been used to stamp bags or packets containing goods that were sent from one place to another. After a bag was closed or tied, a layer of wet clay was applied on the knot, and the seal was pressed on it. The impression of the seal is known as sealing. If the seal was intact, one could be sure that the goods had arrived safely. Seals are used even today. Find out what they are used for. The mystery of the end. Around 3,900 years ago, we found the beginning of a major change. People stopped living in many of the cities. Writing, seals, and weights were no longer used. Raw materials brought from long distance become rare. In Mohenjo-daro, we found the garbage piled up on the streets. The drainage system broke down, and new, less impressive houses were built even over the streets. Why did all this happen? We are not sure. Some scholars suggest that the river dried up. Others suggest that there was deforestation. This could have happened because fuel was required for baking bricks and for smelting copper ores. Besides, grazing by large herds of cattle, sheep, and goats may have destroyed the green cover. In some areas, there were floods, but none of these reasons can explain the end of all the cities. Flooding or a river drying up would have had an effect in only some areas. It appears as if the rulers lost control. In any case, the effect of change are quite clear. Sites in Sindh and West Punjab, present-day Pakistan, were abandoned, while many people moved into newer, smaller settlements to the east and south. The cities emerged about 1400 years later. You will read about them in chapter 5 and 8. Elsewhere. Find Egypt in your atlas. Most of the Egypt is a dry desert except for the land along the river Nile. Around 5,000 years ago, king ruled over Egypt. This king sent armies to distant land to get gold, silver, ivory, timber, and precious stones. They also built large tombs known as pyramids. When they died, their bodies of kings were preserved and buried in these pyramids. These carefully preserved bodies are known as mummies. A large number of objects were buried with them. These include fruits and drink, clothes, ornaments, utensils, music instruments, weapons, and animals. Sometimes even serving men and women were buried with the rulers. These are amongst the most elaborate burials known in the world history.